Well, good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to our third meeting for the Gifted and Talented Enrichment Advisory Council for Northside Independent School District. My name is Danny Lopez. I'm the president of the organization. We like to start our meetings off by reading our mission statement. The mission of the Gifted and Talented Enrichment Advisory Council is to enhance the opportunities and experiences of students in Northside ISD by identifying and recommending improvements for the district's Gifted and Talented program, by expanding public opinion and awareness through communications, and by providing funds for grants and specialized GT projects. So thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Roxanne Brown, and she's going to talk about some of our guests for this evening. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know we have a couple of people that are still trying to get in, and Meredith, there's actually in the chat, they're wondering if you can post the link that doesn't need the passcode. Dr. Woods is here to join us tonight to talk a little bit about GT this year in Northside. As you know, he is our wonderful superintendent, and he's been up since very early this morning, driving all the roads to make sure it's safe for all of us to go to school and go to work. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him get started.
Thanks, Roxanne. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate y'all being with us tonight. It's a great turnout to a meeting like this. I'm impressed. Not generally a fan of virtual meetings anymore, but I have to admit that's pretty good turnout. As Roxanne indicated, I want to talk a little bit about some things that are specific to GT, and then I want to talk a couple of topics that are not at all specific to GT, and then we'll see what questions you have. So Roxanne reminded me that this is the first year, maybe ever, that we've got a full-time GT specialist on every campus, every elementary campus. And that was kind of a thing that Jill and Roxanne negotiated, to be honest, in exchange for looking at elementary enrollment in GT and really trying to enhance that at some campuses that seem to be struggling with enrollment. And based on the data that I've seen recently, they've been very successful in that space. So I want to compliment both of them, and we'll continue to look at that. That was a concern for us when we reviewed data last spring. And it obviously is not a concern at every campus. I don't mean to imply that, but it was a concern at some campuses, and so really appreciate their work in that space. The next topic that is specifically related to GT, and I suspect that if this impacts you, you are already well aware of it, but that is the changes to pretty significant changes to GT programming at our middle school environment. And this impacts all middle school students in the 22-23 school year. As some of you know, and as some of you have spoken to me about, we had moved to a model where students were choosing a core course, not math, but the other three, and having a GT standalone section of that core course and being asked for some research work in that course. And while I would still contend that that's got real possibilities, I understand that there were some logistical issues on many campuses that prevented students from being able to study what they wanted, or at least what their first choice was. And that's not a good thing. And so we had feedback from students, we had feedback from parents, and certainly GT specialists at the middle schools about what a challenge that was. So again, to Roxanne and Jill's credit, they have fashioned a way to solve that problem and to offer every student a GT course every day with the GT specialist, and called it Innovative Thinkers, which I think is really cool title and honors the notion of multiple intelligences, that kids can be gifted in lots of different ways and not just in academic ways. And I appreciate that and understand that that's important. So there will not be GT only sections in core courses. We'll instead move to an Innovative Thinkers model. I believe that the curriculum writing is well underway and that teachers are excited about it. And I also believe I understand, and one of you may correct me if I'm wrong, is that the 8th grade version of this course will, assuming the student is successful, award high school credit. Good, thank you. Which is a goal that we've been pursuing for many years, and in our middle schools, is looking at high school credit possibilities for students who are very bright, either generally or in some areas, and offering that opportunity so that when they get to high school, they've got a lot more opportunities within their schedule to do multiple extracurriculars if they want, to study something very deeply if they like, and really, once they leave high school, feel like they know something about what they want to do after high school, that they've had enough experience that they really have a sense of what they want to do. And just anecdotally, I'll share, as a high school principal a long time ago, some of the most successful kids that I came across were kids who had 5 and 6 art classes. They loved it, right? And they took it going back into middle school. They took it obviously for high school credit in high school, took all of the art history that they could get, and really had a good sense of direction for where they were headed after school, after high school. We also had kids on kind of perhaps a different mode of intelligence who graduated with literally 14 credits in math and science, right? They took every single math and science course that we offered, and again, clearly had at least a general sense of where they were headed after high school. So that's been our goal for a long time, and this will help further that goal for this population of kiddos, and I'm thankful for that. I think that's a great thing. So I should have said, or should have been more clear in saying that these remarks aren't going to take a long time. So if you don't have questions, I'm going to be really brief in your meeting tonight. So be thinking of things if you're interested. I got 2 more things. These are going to move out of the realm of GT. These are things that affect us as a community, or certainly us as an education community. 2 things, and one I'll be brief on both. One is that you may have seen that our board called for a bond election this coming May, and I want to talk a little bit about that from an informational standpoint. I don't want you to feel like this is a bait and switch and you got called here to hear a bond presentation. That's not what I'm getting ready to do. But I do want to talk about kind of the philosophy behind the bond and what we're trying to accomplish if approved by our patrons in May. So so I think I've talked to this group, I've talked to many groups about what are the opportunities for us as a school system as growth has slowed and kind of become more concentrated in particular parts of the district. What does that do for us from an opportunity standpoint? Because obviously when growth slows, you don't need to spend as much of your resources on brand new buildings or additions to older buildings to accommodate many more students. Many of you have been with us a long time, and you can remember those years where we grew year after year after year, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 students a year. There were years that I can recall where we opened 4 and 5 campuses per year just to manage the growth. Obviously, that ate up most of our capacity when we issued a bond. That was the majority of what we were doing, certainly from a financial standpoint. Well, that's changed, and so that gives us some opportunities. And those opportunities look like going back to our campuses for the most part. There is one new school in a very fast-growing area in this bond proposal. What the rest of the bond looks like, though, is going back to our older campuses and doing significant renovation work to try to create some parity between those campuses that are 40, 50, 60 years old and the ones that we've built in the last decade or so. As you can imagine, the gap, if you will, between that era of campuses, those built in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, is pretty big compared to the ones that are built in the last decade. So that's kind of the theme of the work. There is a lot of some of that will be highly visible, where a part of the building will literally come down and we'll start fresh, for instance. So it'll be very obvious what's going on. Some of that will be more behind the scenes on things like parking lots and rooftops and HVAC work. As you might imagine, coming through what we've had in the last 2 years, there's a lot of interest in improving ventilation and circulation in our buildings. And so we've got a number of millions of dollars dedicated to that kind of work, especially again at our older schools. There is a line in the bond that's safety and security, and that looks like some low-tech stuff like door hardware and repairing old door hardware with more sophisticated, newer hardware. It looks like cameras at our campuses, security cameras. It looks like access control, controlling who gets to go in and out of a particular door at a particular time. So there is that item in there. There's certainly technology and some transportation, replacing old buses with newer buses, that kind of thing. One other thing I want to highlight before your eyes glaze over for too much talk about bond is one thing that's changed that I think is pretty significant. Two things that have changed that are pretty significant. One works in our favor and one doesn't, to be honest. The one that works in our favor is that for the first time ever, we're able to say to our patrons, we can do this $992 million worth of work without a tax rate increase. We can promise no tax rate increase. That's the first time we've been able to make that promise in these kinds of information campaigns. The other one that doesn't work in our favor is that, contrary to what I just said about no tax rate increase, in 2019, in their wisdom, the legislature passed as part of another bill a requirement that school districts, and only school districts, when they went out for a bond election, have to add to their ballot language at the very bottom of the ballot language, the actual paragraph you read when you go into the voting booth. This is a tax increase. Literally, that language in all capital letters is required to be added. And so I highlight that because it's on us as a system to educate folks that that's out there and how both things can be equally true, right? And that's obviously tough for folks to wrap their head around. So that language that the legislature required applies to everybody, whether your bond would issue a potential tax rate increase or not. Ours won't, but we were still required to put that language on the ballot. So let me transition to one more topic, and interestingly, it's also about voting, and that's about voting in primary elections. So we have one more day of early voting in the primary election, and then next Tuesday is the actual election day in the primaries. And I know that's another thing that makes a lot of people's eyes glaze over, and I get it. The issue for us in Texas and in other places in the country, but it's particularly acute in Texas, is that each party has a primary election, and folks obviously are required to choose one to vote in, right? I either vote in the Democratic primary or I vote in the Republican primary. Very few people vote in the primary. Typically about 1/4 of the people who vote in a general election. So it's a relatively small number. And those people have a tendency, if you can picture a bell curve, to be out on the pretty close to the fringes of the bell curve. They are the ones who are energized by a primary election. And when the only people voting in a primary are the folks that are kind of out on the fringe of the bell curve, what that does is a couple of things. One is it tends to elect candidates who are more extreme in their views, either left or right, more extreme, and it discourages people who tend to be more in the middle of the bell curve from running for office, because they're pretty certain they can't get elected if they feel like we ought to be doing things that are closely to the middle of the bell curve. So what I say all that to say, reasonable people like the ones on this call who care about policy initiatives that are practical, that help kids, that help families, that grow our state from a financial standpoint, from a business standpoint, need to vote in the primaries because it helps us pick less extreme folks who are more likely then to be able to actually communicate with each other and get something positive done. And it also encourages people who can listen to others, who don't see somebody whose political beliefs are different as their sworn enemy. So they can listen to others. They can have a reasonable conversation. They can come listen to an educator, for instance, even if they don't have a public ed background or kids in public schools, and get something out of that conversation that becomes good policy. So I just encourage folks to vote in primary election. And again, I realize it's challenging to review the candidates and all of that. But every one of those of us who's reasonable, who's kind of thinks of themselves as some kind of centrist, who doesn't vote, we miss an opportunity to improve that situation. And it is not healthy, I think, for our society. And it's not healthy for our policy making, the system, the way it's operating now. And the only people who can deal with that are us. And that involves our participation. So at that point, I think I'm going to stop and I'm going to see what questions anybody has. And once we've exhausted that, I will get out of your meeting and y'all can go on to the rest of your agenda.
Okay, so I'll just read some questions from the Q&A box if that's okay with you. The first one is, thanks for the update on the middle school GT changes. Can you further explain this? In 6th grade that had an advisory period, will it happen then? In 7th grade, they had 2 electives. So does this replace one of their electives? In 8th grade, they had 2 electives plus the speech/comm apps class. So where does it fit into that? I can't imagine it replacing the 8th grade elective since some of those were high school credit. If it does offer high school credit, would it cover the speech credit or just an elective?
You are way over my level. So I'm gonna ask Jill or Roxanne to answer that question.
So I can answer that one. So in 6th grade, it will take the place of the advisory period. So the students won't have the traditional advisory. They'll have the GT Innovative Thinkers class for 6th grade. In 7th grade, our students will have a 1-hour English class. And then opposite of that, they will have the GT Innovative Thinkers class. And so they will not be losing an elective in 7th grade. And in 8th grade, it will take the place of the speech/comm apps class, which right now they're getting high school credit for. So they will continue to get high school credit for that. So they're not losing a typical elective. Ms. Hackney, do you want to add anything to that?
The only piece I would add is that in 8th grade, the Innovative Thinkers course, it will fulfill their speech requirement. So that was part of the question. So they won't have to take speech in high school.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Sure. Can you please clarify GT services for middle school magnet students? It's my understanding that GT will be served through the magnet teachers in core courses and not our GT specialist beginning next school year. And they also said, thank you for your time today, Dr. Woods.
And again, I defer the answer to that question.
So we actually had a meeting about that today. So from now on, our students in our magnet middle school programs, all of the magnet teachers will be GT trained. So they will all have their 30 hours. So the students, the GT students, the magnet schools will be served through their magnet classes because they do not have time for the Innovative Thinkers elective.
I should have said, and it's only tangentially related, but it's something I should have pointed out, and that is that also in the bond proposal is 3 additional middle school magnet programs at 3 additional schools where they do not exist currently, as well as a high school magnet program, which is going to be dedicated to the teaching profession. So all 4 of those programs are also in that bond proposal, even though that's only tangentially related to the question.
Okay, thanks, y'all. With the move to more and more online testing, will there be any financial allotment towards supporting GT classrooms with dedicated iPads or Chromebooks? Even though students have devices, circumstances arise when a device is not available and then testing schedules are interrupted or postponed.
I guess I'm not clear on what testing we're talking about.
So our GT testing has moved to online versus paper pencil. And so I guess this is someone asking if a child does not have an iPad or a Chromebook, will we have any additional technology in the GT classrooms? I would guess that the campuses would have additional technology that could be borrowed for the
I agree with that. I mean, for one, every student ought to be issued an iPad or a Chromebook. And then certainly if there are others needed, the campuses do have a surplus. And if we find that that's not sufficient, Roxanne or Joe can bring that forward. But yeah, I feel good that we could satisfy that demand.
Thank you. Okay. I feel like campuses have opened up at very different rates. Are there general guidelines for campuses to follow? For example, my daughter's campus still does not allow any holiday parties, bike rodeos, safety patrols, field trips, etc.
Yeah, I think we're talking about COVID now. So whoever asked that, what I would ask you to do is call our main number 397-8500 and ask to speak to elementary administration, because that is something that we're struggling with both internally to a degree and with our parents and patrons to a degree, because folks see that in very different ways depending upon their experience in the last 2 years. And so we're trying to be sensitive to both pushing to return to what we would call normal activities and yet be sensitive to what the community seems to want. So the answer to the question is, we don't have a set of general guidelines that is published and available. We do have a set of general, me telling them I want this done, but that's obviously not published. But I would encourage you to make that phone call and just express your opinion about that, and obviously tell them what campus your child's at. So I missed a couple. Sorry, I'm half looking at the chat. There was a question about.
I pulled the chat questions, so I have like a list of questions from both the chat and the Q&A. If you want me to keep going.
I don't have to pay attention. Keep going.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Got it.
Are the GT specialist positions in every campus a permanent campus position or dependent on funding? If funding dependent, what can we do to move that into permanent roles?
That it's depending on funding. Well, but in fairness, everything's dependent on funding. So I don't want to, I don't say that GT is the only category that, that fits that. So, I don't want folks to worry specifically about GT, but it's really, what it's really tied to is enrollment, right? Because what I have to convince myself of is that that individual is serving enough students to justify the full-time position, right? That's the goal. And there's a legitimate argument that they have been successful in bringing forward that if it's less than a full-time specialist, they're going to have a hard time recruiting and finding students. And I get that, and I'm sensitive to that. But it's really more of an enrollment question than it is directly a funding question.
Thank you. Does NISD have any plans to provide any mental health resources for students? All kids have been affected by COVID to some extent, but we do find that many GT kids are even more sensitive to the current events and are more prone to anxiety. Thank you for all you do.
So the answer is yes, but it's a very partial yes. Schools are really not set up internally to provide direct service mental health resources. Generally, the folks we hire in roles like counseling are not licensed to do that work. And there's also all kinds of ethical concerns about a person doing that work on campus and then having a caseload that they're not allowed, or they don't have the time to serve. So what we typically do in that space, and we've done it a lot more since COVID, since we returned to campuses, is contract with service providers to offer those services. Now, obviously, that requires a referral from some professional educator, but we've dedicated, don't quote me on this, about $15 million in federal stimulus money to do just that. But there is a referral process and so forth. So to be honest, even though it sounds like it, 15 million is not a lot of money. And so we're really trying to prioritize those kids that seem to be struggling the most and are really having a hard time. So there you go. There's my answer on that one.
Thank you. Is there funding allocated per campus for GT classrooms for extracurricular items such as field trips or special materials or activities? If not, what can we do to advocate or support campus to raise funds specifically for GT?
I think the answer is yes, but I'll defer that specifics?
Yes, there is funding provided for supplies, GT supplies at every campus, as well as money for field trips. So that is a yes. Meredith, do you want to keep reading or do you want me to read?
Yeah, I'm going, sorry.
Okay.
If a student was GT in elementary and middle school, but is now in high school as a freshman, but is not currently taking a GT class, can they select a GT class in either their junior or senior year, or are they out of the program?
They can
That's it.
still, I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Dr. Woods.
No, go. You're going to be better than me.
There are high school electives available, and even if they don't take it as a 9th grader, they can opt in later on. So they do have options as they move through high school.
And they're awesome options. Not that I taught one for a little while. Okay, next question. Will families
Meredith,
who...
let me interrupt for just a
Okay,
minute.
sorry.
Because there was another question later on asking about innovative thinkers in the 9th grade. The courses that we offer at high school are not called innovative thinkers. That's going to be strictly our middle school program. But when you're in high school, we have a course called GT Leadership 1, which is usually the freshman level course. You can also take it as a sophomore. We then have GT Leadership 2. And then we also have what we call ISM, which is our independent study mentorship, which you can take as a junior or a senior, or you can actually take it twice. You can take it both years. So we have GT classes. They're all honors levels classes at the high school level, but they're not going to be called innovative thinkers. So I just wanted to clarify that it is a different program.
Thank you. Do you know if families who live in Chavano Park will be able to vote on the bond proposal since they aren't in San Antonio per se?
Yes, it's tied to residency in the Northside School District, not to the city or even the county. It's purely if you live within the geography of the school district.
Thank you. A couple questions about the magnet schools. One asked, could you mention which campuses are included in the bond to implement magnet programs, and what are the 3 new magnet programs being planned?
Yes, so don't quote me on the order, but the 3 campuses are Hobby, Stinson, and Jordan. The programming is health science, kind of the general health field. That would be Hobby because of its geography, because of our desire for those kids to be able to actually go into the health science center, the medical center area. Stinson would actually be a sports medicine because of its geography to our athletic complex there at Ferris, as well as the location close to UTSA's main campus where they're building out a pretty robust sports science and medicine program. And then at Jordan, we're thinking that's probably the one that's the last in line. And so our thinking is not as far along, but international language and international relations is where we think we're headed with that one. Just as a tangent that goes a little bit beyond the question, the way that we select the programming at all of these programs, whether they be a middle school or a high school magnet, is to look at the San Antonio MSA data on high wage, high demand employment. And so it's not random or just because we found somebody who wants to teach it. It's actually based on how we think students can be successful once they leave us. And then sometimes we have to tweak the programming that we offer because that data around high wage, high demand changes over time.
Thank you. At a district level, what impact have you seen on teacher staffing, i.e. early retirements, higher turnover from the pandemic over the last 2 years, and how are you responding to this? Particularly when, if you are losing long tenured staff whose skill set are not easily backfilled?
Yeah, it's a really vexing problem that we were fortunate in Northside pre-COVID largely to be exempt from. And it was a problem across the state in urban and in rural areas, not so much for us. And that has completely been pushed on its head. I was in a meeting today with the Commissioner of Education talking about this very topic and how we can, as a state, as well as local school districts, what can we do to try to improve that situation? The answer to the original question around turnover is I can give you a partial answer. So at the end of the 2021 school year, so the end of last school year, our turnover percentage, which is much lower than the state average, even for independent school districts, much less for charter schools that have about 3 times the turnover that independent school districts do. Our average was not very different than it was pre-COVID. Now, I understand that's changed some this year, but I can't quote you the data from the current school year. But as of the end of last school year, we hadn't seen massive turnover numbers. And again, I think that's evolving. Clearly, though, for the first time ever, we began the year with some vacancies in teacher roles, some of which still have not been filled. And so that is a completely new phenomenon for us. So the answer to the question is like all complex problems, there's not any one or even probably 10 single answers to the question. It's going to be a lot of things working together. So some is like long range strategy. So obviously we're looking at grow your own programming. I mentioned to you a high school magnet that's going to focus on the teaching profession, frankly. And we hope to graduate once we're up and running 150 or 200 people a year who have gotten an inside look at teaching and really view that as a clear professional pathway for them. And obviously long term, we hope to place them in a college or university that we think is good for them, and then welcome them back as teachers in our system. But that's obviously a long range plan. There are other shorter range plans that I'm less thrilled with, to be honest. There are all kinds of folks out there talking about how do we get alternatively certified folks better prepared for the classroom. And I would say it is not true to say that anybody who's alternative certified is poorly prepared. That's not true. I've seen some rock star teachers who came to us as a second career and then went through an alternative certification program, and they knocked it out of the park from the beginning. That is, however, not the norm. And so there's going to have to be a way to better prepare those alternatively certified folks. And again, we're visiting with a number of them that we work with already to try to get them some more robust time in classrooms before they're just thrown into the space, which is the challenge for those folks as we speak. So anyway, it's a long way of saying it's a nuanced problem that, like I say, we have been largely exempt from until literally this year.
Thank you. With all the new campuses and the current lines for my schools, where can I find information on when rezoning in my area might occur?
The way we do attendance zoning is to go through a public process. So we don't necessarily forecast where we would rezone way ahead of time. What we do is once we've looked at the possibility of a rezone internally and we've shared it with our board, anybody who would be involved in the proposal would get direct communication, both via snail mail and email, that their area of the district was being considered. And then they would be invited to send feedback, either written or in person. There's always a public hearing tied to a boundary change. And then that goes back to our board of trustees ultimately for approval. So that's how the process works. But it's hard to know in many cases, especially in a fast growth area, more than say 2 years ahead of time, what that rezoning might look like.
Thank you. What are your ideas on how parents can best support the GT program across all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high, on all levels, micro, meso, and macro?
Well, I think stay involved beyond your child being in elementary school, right? That's a common, and that doesn't just apply to GT folks, and I don't mean to imply that. The stay involved with your kids' education and stay involved with their GT specific, right? Stay involved with that work. I think if advocate, obviously, which you have this opportunity to do in this setting here, that to me is the biggest aspect of it, right? Is to stay involved with it. What we see for all students, all socioeconomic backgrounds, is a fair amount of parent involvement in the pre-K 5 space that declines in the 6 through 8 space, that further declines in the 9 through 12 space. And so if we can buck that trend a little bit, I think that that's a healthy thing. It's a healthy thing for children and also for the schools they attend.
Roxanne or Jill, did you want to add anything?
No, I was going to actually answer the next question that just popped up in the Q&A,
Okay.
which kind of ties to that. It's a parent asking, is there a greater academic benefit to being in GT throughout elementary and middle school, as in high school there seems to be a disconnect? As a former high school GT teacher with Meredith, we would tell you that the high school electives are a really great opportunity for students. And I know that high schoolers have a lot of choice in all of the electives that are offered, but many former GT students would come back and tell me, especially the elective that they take, GT Leadership 1, is the class that they said, you know, when you're taking it, you don't realize how much you need it until later on in high school. And then they would say, like, everybody should have to take this class. So I really am a big believer in the GT Leadership class. We also have the Independent Study Mentorship class, which students say is the best prep they have for really getting ready for what college will be like. Because there's so much, obviously, independence, because it's called independent study. They're working on something that they love, that they're interested in, and they're working with adults, and all of those build skills that they will need when we send them off to college. So I would really encourage you, parents, to, as they continue to move up and get to high school, to talk to those high school GT specialists and hear what they have to say about those programs, because I really think they're great benefits to students moving forward.
I guess different side of the same coin is, you know, one of the things that folks talk about is the number of offerings in a big comprehensive high school, and whether that's a good thing or not so good a thing. And clearly, I agree with what Roxanne said. Absolutely. You know, one of the things I heard from the Texas Education Agency today in that meeting about teacher pipeline issues was, you guys offer too much, and you can narrow your offerings, and that'll help concentrate teacher candidates into the more important offerings. And I really pushed back on that. I said, you know, it seems to me like middle school and high school ought to, at least in part, being about figuring out what I think I might want to study and be interested in. And so we feel, the Board of Trustees and I feel like we actually want to go the other direction. If possible, we want to offer more to kids. We want to offer a broader scope. Now, obviously, we look at that high wage, high demand data before we do it. It's not just willy-nilly, but we're not going to, and you know, unless some kind of severe budget issue, we're not going to cut back on offerings. That's not the way we look at it, just philosophically.
Thank you. Dr. Woods, who can parents address besides the principal to try to get a full cafeteria staff at a campus? Our cafeteria can only serve one line because we have not had staff all year. Kids are waiting a very long time to get their food. They eat on half of a takeaway box instead of trays.
Yeah, that's the principal. You're right. That's not they're not in charge of that. Each cafeteria has a manager, if you will, and they're in charge of hiring and staffing. To say that it's been hard to find cafeteria workers and custodians and that kind of group of employees is a massive understatement. And as a percentage compared to teacher shortages, which we're all much more familiar with, we have much bigger shortages in those areas. And it is not for a lack of trying. That group holds job fairs about every 2 weeks to try to fill those vacancies. And I see the data on vacancies literally every week. It's a running challenge. And until the economy in the relative low wage scale stabilizes post-COVID, that's going to continue to be a challenge. But that one does not fall on the principal.
Thank you. Is pre-K 4 going to be offered for tuition for students next year?
Don't know the answer to that. We're still finishing out offering pre-K 4 to qualifiers. And the last phase of that will be the 22-23 school year. So I have that as a goal for our early childhood team. Whether they'll be able to fulfill that goal in 22-23 is still uncertain. But that is something we want to get ourselves to. We also want to get ourselves to a space where we can offer, not likely for tuition, but for qualifiers, pre-K 3 for 3-year-olds as well. But that's a ways we're still working ourselves in that direction.
Thank you. At a district level, are you looking to expand or further invest in Spanish immersion programs, i.e. more campuses or more classes per campus? There is a lot of overlap in GT and immersion students, and early second language acquisition is proven to have a positive impact developmentally.
Yes, we've expanded dual language enrollment the last 3 years, maybe 4. Even during the pandemic, I think we added a couple of 3 campuses a year. So that is a continued goal. There are budgetary challenges around that keep us from kind of a breakneck expansion. But the answer is yes. We see ultimately that dual language will be the way. We will serve both limited emerging English speakers as well as those who wish to seek Spanish as a second language.
Thank you. We got our last 2 questions for you so we can respect your time. We know you've had a long day. Are the GT programs offered at magnet high schools such as health careers?
Roxanne's gonna have to help me here.
No, they are not. I think I answered that one. They are not offered at health careers. The health careers have, they have so many required courses that it has not been part of their curriculum at health careers.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Are they available at the other magnet campuses? I know health careers is a standalone.
Yes, they are available at the other campuses.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Meredith.
Yeah. Final question. As a middle school GT parent and sub, I would just like to wholeheartedly advocate for the middle school magnet programs, the 2 current ones and the 3 proposed. If your 4th graders are interested, please consider applying next year as 5th graders to our middle school magnet programs. Oh, that's a great endorsement. Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't realize it wasn't a question, but
no, but here on that, because yeah, that's, sometimes it can be a challenge for an understandable challenge for a parent of a 4th or 5th grader who hasn't had a child go through secondary yet, to look at that and think, am I willing to commit, my student to something like that for 3 years? But we clearly think there is value, and we think that the programming, while engaging and somewhat specific to a kind of a broad job field, doesn't mean that a student's selecting a major like they're going to college, at age 10 or 11. Right. It's clearly more general than that. And we think kids are really going to benefit from it. And I'll tell you, we're in our 2nd cohort of students at one magnet, middle school magnet, and our 1st cohort at another. And I've talked to kids in both of those settings, and it's really inspirational to hear them talk about that. So if parents are thinking about that even remotely, there is an opportunity to visit those programs, and would encourage you to consider that and talk to the educators, and of course, at least as importantly, talk to the kids.
thank you, Dr. Woods. Those are all our questions for you this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Yeah. Good to be with all of you. Really appreciate your time and your advocacy for your children and for public schools. So thanks, everybody. Y'all take care and stay safe in the morning.
Thank you so much,
Thanks, sir.
Dr. Woods. We really appreciate it.
You bet. I'll take care.
All right, our speaker, we had a lady that was going to come tonight to talk a little bit about a specific camp, but she has had to leave town for a funeral. So I am going to share with parents some of our camp opportunities that we have for summer for you to consider. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Meredith, do you see the north side screen up? Perfect.
Yes.
All right, parents. So I'm going to walk you through this in case you would like to look later when you're at home. This is just the north side webpage. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you will find where it says district programs. And if you click district programs, you can scroll down, and GT is part of the Office of Advanced Academics. So we've now moved to the first space on here. So if you click here, you can see we have a whole new webpage set up. And if your kids are in GT, you'll want to know everything about advanced academics. So these are all the different kind of subgroups that fall under advanced academics. And if you scroll down, you can look through any of these. A lot of these are high school related, but I know a lot of you parents that maybe have middle schoolers hear us talk about advanced placement or on-ramps or advanced courses or dual credit, and you'd like to learn more about it. So you can click on any of these and read more about that. But the one I want to show you right now is gifted and talented. So when you click here, this is our general landing page. And we've now made a page for our elementary services, our middle school services, high school services, testing and identification. And the one I want to show you right now is resources and opportunities. When you land here, you can kind of scroll down. We've got some information about credit by exam, the GT Enrichment Advisory Council, some parent resources, student resources, and right here, just today, they updated our summer opportunities for us. So in GT, Dr. Woods did not say, but I will let you know, we've been allowed 2 instructional support teachers this year that help us with GT, that are part of the GT staff here at central office. And one of our new ISTs put this together. This is a list of summer camp opportunities. So this is there, it's updated. You can scroll through and look at some of the various activities. Camp Invention's been offered by Northside for the, I think, probably last 3 or 4 years. We're having it again this year. It's got a contact person, as well as a website that you can look at. And then we kind of went through some around the city that you might be interested in. Some are outside of the city. We've got A&M Galveston, A&M College Station. Oh, I don't know, there's a whole bunch. The Young Engineers and Scientists at Southwest Research is a great program that works with high school students. So you can kind of scroll through and see if there's something that might pique your interest. I was going to share these 2 down here, the Southwest School of Arts Summer Art Studio and the Southwest School of Arts Nature of Art at Confluence Park were what our speaker tonight was going to talk about, but Ms. Morales, like I said, had to leave town for a funeral. But I hope this will be a great resource to you to kind of give you some ideas of maybe something to do with your child this summer. And then we did have one parent earlier. I'm going to back up to GT. We had one parent earlier that asked about the MAC GT program. MAC GT is our Math and Clustering for GT Students program. And if you're interested in more information about that, if you go to the elementary page, there's some information about it, and it lists all of our current MAC GT campuses, and we will be expanding those over the next 3 years. So I just wanted to share that information with you so you have some summer camp options. And I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Danny.
Thank you, Roxanne. That's some great work. I know parents are always looking for that type of information. I've enrolled my own elementary GT student in Camp Invention this year too. So that's looking forward to that. But there definitely look like some opportunities my middle schooler would enjoy as well. So you guys have done a great job there, and we appreciate that. As we get towards the end here, just a couple announcements. We won't be holding our usual walkathon this year. We weren't able to organize it. The good news is that we do have enough funds available that we'll still be awarding some grants and some scholarships. And for some details on that, Rebecca Hughes is going to catch us up with the treasurer.
Can everyone hear me? Perfect. So as Danny said, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rebecca Hughes, and I am the current treasurer and fundraising chair. So as Danny said, unfortunately, due to everything happening with COVID, we have just had issues with trying to get the walkathon off the ground. Everyone has been busy, and luckily, we've had great support from our elementary and middle school teachers throughout the years. And so we really wanted to continue with the program, but we know that they are overwhelmed with everything that is going on with COVID, and we wanted them to be able to focus on students. And as Danny also mentioned, luckily we are able to have the funds that are in our account that we have saved over the last few years. Our goal is next year to once again start with the walkathon. Hopefully we'll be able to have the same great committee that we've had in the past with the support of our middle school and elementary school teachers, and can continue with that program. But we are still here to support our GT teachers. We will still do some of those grants, as well as have a few scholarships that we've had in the past. So please don't think we're not trying to work towards our goals, because it is still part of our goals for next year. So thank you to my previous committees. We could not do it without you, and hopefully we'll get things back rolling next year. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Awesome. Go ahead, Rex.
Sorry, Danny, I just wanted to add to that. We will be having a March 8th fundraiser at 4 of the area Chipotles, and we will send out the flyer to all of our GT specialists. So everybody can go on March 8th and add money to the pot.
Awesome. I think, and with that, just going to foot stomp two things that Dr. Wood said. One is there's an election next week. Elections matter, so get out and vote. And the second one is about supporting bonds. So as many of y'all know, I am a product of Northside Independent School District. And as an adult, I've come to realize how important it was for previous generations to invest in the infrastructure that I benefited from. And I always give people these two examples. One is that when I was at the University of Texas taking engineering physics, there wasn't one piece of lab equipment that I saw in Austin that I hadn't seen in my high school at Holmes. And that's because people like you invested in kids like me. And we don't fund public education to educate our kids. We fund it to live in a community of educated people. And so with that in mind, remember to get out there and vote and support our community. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for coming tonight. And I'm sorry for the delay in getting started and the passcode and all of that. But we will also, if you have friends that say, oh, they didn't get on, Meredith has recorded the meeting tonight, and we will make sure that we get it posted and sent out. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Stay warm, stay safe. And I think that's it. Hopefully we'll see you March 8th. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you, everybody.